Woodhart. When I was a little child, my parents rented the movie All the President's Men one evening. Watching Woodward and Bernstein dismantle the Nixon White House inspired me so much that I made the decision to become a newspaper reporter when I grew up. I set my sights on Columbia University's School of Journalism with the goal of becoming a crusading reporter who would take on the corrupt establishment. With the help of a sizable student loan, a scholarship, and good grades, I was able to achieve my goal. 3 priceless gifts from Columbia University were an excellent education, a decent chance at an entry-level media job after graduation, and a stunning wife. Permit me to briefly discuss each. One of the best journalism schools in the nation, Columbia taught me the fundamentals of conducting research, writing about it, and reporting on it in addition to investigative, broadcast, and digital media reporting. Distinguished professors and seasoned journalists in the field were among my teachers. All they failed to teach me was how to get a job in the fiercely competitive journalism industry. In addition to an abundance of reporters, editors, and news personnel, the industry as a whole, at least in the newspaper sector, is rapidly declining. And even if you do manage to land a job, the salary is very low. As my time in college drew to an end, I found myself in this unwelcoming environment. I was so in need of work as graduation drew near that I gave serious thought to taking an unpaid internship in order to obtain some experience. However, alumni relations at Columbia, not the placement office, saved me at the last minute. My dad's good friend turned out to be a Columbia alum, and he offered me a position as an assistant copy editor, fact checker at one of the Washington, D.C. area newspapers. Though it was not what I had imagined for myself, in the sea, a man who is drowning will cling to any life preserver. I was in a desperate job search because, despite my busy schedule of classes and practice reports, I had managed to fall in love. During my senior year, I even went as far as getting engaged. My intended, Nicole, was a political science major with whom I had taken a comparative politics course our junior year. She was beautiful, articulate, ambitious, and intelligent. What began as a friendship in the classroom quickly developed into a physically and emotionally intimate bond. I found that she was just as passionate about our relationships as she was about political debates. To put it simply, we were infatuated with one another and quickly realized that we wanted much more from each other than just a few years of college. Nikki's future was all set, unlike mine. Nikki's parents were good friends with the third-term congressman from her home district, and he had promised their daughter a job as an aide in his office in Washington after graduation. We got married shortly after graduation, so my job in D.C. was a godsend. We discovered that despite having 2 jobs, we could only afford a small walk-up apartment located in a remote area of Bethesda. But these are just small annoyances when you're young and in love. Nikki immersed herself in Capitol Hill's inner workings and quickly came to love her new surroundings. For my part, I was happy to have a job even though I didn't feel like I had many responsibilities. My dream of being a crusading reporter did not mesh well with proofreading other people's copy. However, I had to keep telling myself that it was still better than being jobless, and that it might even lead to something better. That's exactly what happened in the end, though not in the way I had anticipated. One afternoon I was called into my boss's office, and as soon as I sat down in the hard wooden chair across from his desk, he gave me an evaluative look that left me feeling very uneasy. At last, he raised a piece of paper that I knew to be my resume. Writing is permitted here. Is it accurate? Yes, sir, I said in a serious tone. It also indicates that you're a fairly intelligent man, at least in terms of books. Is it accurate? I guess I did okay in school, I remarked in a humble tone. I didn't think this was the right time to brag that I had graduated with honors. He gave a sigh. Now, for the details. Agatha Cornwell retires next week. It implies that someone needs to start reading her column. You are it. I forcefully swallowed. It's not exactly that Agatha Cornwell was an adventurous reporter. She wrote the daily advice to the lovelorn column for the paper, so she wasn't really a reporter at all. The column was ridiculed by the staff members who, for the most part, never even bothered to read it. It had to be the worst assignment ever, worse than writing obituaries, to be told to write it. I guess the boss took my response for enthusiasm. Don't go putting all your hope in this just yet. In actuality, the readership of the column is among the lowest of any section in the newspaper. However, the managing editor doesn't want to kill it and create a ruckus because it has a small but devoted following. Furthermore, don't go telling anyone that you're the new Aunt Agatha because we don't want Agatha's readers to know that the old bat is no longer with us. Understand that? I gave a nod of comprehension. He didn't need to worry. I didn't want anyone I knew to find out that I was now writing a column offering advice. He squinted at me with steely eyes once more. Don't screw it up, understand? I nodded, then retreated from his office to sit at my desk and lament my lot in life. A column offering advice. I had no idea how I was going to look Nikki and our friends in the eye. I would end up the laughingstock of the Columbia School of Journalism if word got out. The only thing that saved me was that I was forbidden by the boss from telling anyone about my new assignment. That was a meager consolation even. Great, I thought with dejection. Not only do I have the worst job on the paper, but I can't even cry about it to anyone. Nikki asked me why I had such a long face when I got home that evening. Fortunately, she let it go because she wanted to tell me about her work. I made up a story about having a bad day at the office. It turned out that her new boss was quite well known in the political circles, which excited her. In Washington, congressmen are commonplace, but Timothy Vickers was quickly emerging as one of his party's rising stars. He was attractive, youthful, and very smart. He was a very attractive couple, along with his spouse. He was already being talked about as having bigger things ahead of him. Nikki excitedly told me. One of the other aides told me he might be considered as possible vice presidential material. Just think, I might be working in the White House someday. I regret not being more ecstatic about her good fortune than I ought to have been. Though, I suppose, I was still feeling sorry for myself over my new assignment. I was happy for her. I was shown to my new workspace on Monday morning, and to my amazement, I discovered that I genuinely had a small office. That was at least a little payment for accepting such a menial job. But after I took a seat behind the old wooden desk, I discovered that I was stuck in a snowstorm. There were haphazardly stacked piles of papers and letters everywhere. I didn't know where to begin and felt lost. A pretty young woman about my age poked her head in the door at that very moment as there was a soft knock. "Hello, this is Mandy," she said. "I'll be your helper." Helper? Do I receive an assistant in an office? Perhaps this was not going to be as horrible as it seemed. I said, "Hello, Mandy, I'm Casey, and I'm completely lost. Would you kindly come in and explain the situation to me?" She smiled broadly, settled into the little chair next to my little desk, and started talking. I soon found out that Mandy hadn't been thrilled about her assignment either, and that she had only been working with Agatha for 3 months. She admitted, "It's not exactly hard-nosed journalism, but it gets on your nerves after a while. You start to believe that helping the people who are in need of guidance is worthwhile because there are so many of them out there." She passed me a pile of Agatha's latest columns to peruse, and before long, I had an image in my head of an elderly, kind woman who spent her days giving her flock of terminally uncertain people a little insight and common sense. Mandy then took me through a selection of the letters that incessantly arrived each day. I noticed as I studied them that Aunt Agatha was asked only drab, uninteresting questions. Mandy winked at me and gave me another stack of letters when I asked her about that. "What are these?" I inquired. She smiled at me, a little embarrassed. "Those are all the questions Agatha didn't want to answer," Mandy stated to me. "She just wasn't very comfortable talking about certain subjects, especially those she thought were weird or naughty." Well, I soon discovered that there were a lot of strange and mischievous readers out there when I began going through the letters in the second stack. I gave Mandy a smile. "We're going to stop dodging questions about naughty topics, I promise you of that. I don't claim to be all that knowledgeable in this area. People enjoy reading about that kind of content, so we're going to start providing it to them." She looked at me with concern. "That's okay with me, but I'm not sure how management will respond. If you understand what I mean, they've been content with sugar and spice and everything nice for a while. Look, I'm going to do this my way even though I didn't ask for this assignment," I said to her. "The boss can get someone else if he doesn't like it. Are you present?" She grinned. "Okay, count me in." Luckily, Agatha had a little backlog because she prepared her columns several days ahead of time. Because of this, I was able to carefully review the letters in the Do Not Answer file and select the ones I wanted to use for my first column. I also thought a lot about the look I wanted to go for. I wanted to answer with a little attitude, but I definitely intended to give answers that reflected my beliefs. I felt confident enough after a few false starts to send Mandy some passages from my first draft for her assessment. "Greetings, Aunt Agatha, I adore my spouse, but I've just learned that I have a bisexual side. I want to try some new things now with some guys I met. I don't feel like I would be cheating on my wife as long as I don't mess with other women. How do you feel?" Dear switch hitter, hitting from both sides of the plate or being a lefty doesn't change the fact that it's cheating. I have been happily married to my husband for 10 years, Aunt Agatha, but recently I had an affair with a man who works in my office. I'm really sorry about what I did. Shall I come clean and ask for his pardon? If you confess to your husband, Roberta, you are merely absolving yourself of responsibility and placing the burden of pain on him. Keep it to yourself and try to be the best wife you can be to make up for your error. The cost of doing something you knew was wrong is the guilt you experience. Dear Aunt Agatha, I received a picture of a married man's junk on my cell phone from someone in my office. How should I proceed? Would you please forward his text to his wife, grossed out, so she can give her input? She'll probably have one." Mandy gave me a cunning smile. "I don't know how management is going to like it, but at least they can't say your column is boring." As expected, my supervisor barged into my office that afternoon, demanding to see the column I had turned in. "What in the hell do you think you're doing, Casey?" he screamed. "The readers of Aunt Agatha are a group of kind little old ladies. With stuff like this, you're going to twist their kneecaps." I refused to accept any of it. "I completed the task you asked me to do. Before you spike it, why don't you give it a chance?" With an angry snort, he stalked out, but not before letting the column run. We had the opportunity to receive feedback almost immediately because the paper was available online in addition to in print. Ask Aunt Agatha never seemed to get much response, as Mandy had told me, so I was shocked the day she came into my office and used my computer to access the online comments for my column. It seems that my initial attempt had generated a significant reaction. While some readers criticized Aunt Agatha for her casual attitude toward important matters, others applauded her firm stances. Being completely unprepared for any kind of response, I was a little uneasy about the ruckus I'd created. Mandy was thrilled, though. "This is the biggest reaction I've ever seen to an Aunt Agatha column," she stated to me. I remained uncertain. "Some of them sure didn't like what I said or how I said it," I said. "Happy," she said. "Who cares? At least you made them think about it." The response to the first column was replicated over the next few days, with comments supporting and criticizing the new subject matter and tone. I could only wonder how all of this would affect management. In the following 2 weeks, I discovered the response to a query I had asked myself at the beginning of the new position: why did I require an assistant? I started to make sense of it when I noticed the pile of letters arriving. Furthermore, I started to question whether 2 people would be sufficient to handle the influx after Mandy showed me how to access Aunt Agatha's email account. Each email and letter needed to be read, categorized, and filed according to the date. A few would go into the ignore folder, some into the to be answered folder, and some into the think about it later folder. After that, we would debate the questions in the first group and determine how to respond to them. When the boss arrived at my door the following Friday afternoon, I had just finished writing my Monday column. Since our last encounter, I'd avoided him, so I was apprehensive when he suddenly appeared. He frowned and said, "I just got the latest report on the number of hits for our online site. I also got a report on the feedback your column has gotten." I refrained from breathing. He continued, "They might not always appreciate your snarky comments, but at least they're reading it. There has been a 35% increase in hits on Ask Aunt Agatha. You get to keep your job for another week, I suppose." Next, he stomped out of my workspace. I was taken aback. I had the same feeling as the Academy Awards actress. "You really like me? You really like me?" Mandy ran in to give me a big hug after she caught me eavesdropping. "Casey, congratulations. The boss hardly ever delivers the results to anyone in person, so those are fantastic results. He must be really happy with this." I returned the hug, doing my best John Wayne impression. "Aw shucks, ma'am, it warn't nothing." In all honesty, though, I felt pretty damn good. Even though I didn't get the job I wanted, I was at least making progress in the one I was assigned. My only regret, as I drove home that evening, was not being able to tell Nikki about it. Nevertheless, I didn't have time to consider it because Nikki reminded me that we had to head out for the weekend as soon as I got home. Spouses and significant others were invited to a staff retreat being hosted by Congressman Vickers, her boss, at a wealthy backer's estate in Wye River. Probably because of my experience as a journalist, but I find most elected officials to be rather cynical. I was more than a little uneasy when I heard Congressman Clean, as the media had come to refer to him, preach about personal morality and family values. I wasn't excited about shaking hands with Congressman Vickers and his entourage as a result, but I didn't let Nikki know how I felt. Subsequently, during our brief conversation over cocktails, I had to concede that he was a charming, albeit sincere, kind of guy. I got to meet Mrs. Vickers the following day while Nikki and the other staff members were having a meeting with him, and I had an even better response. I had anticipated a stereotypical Stepford Wives type who could memorize a campaign speech and could speak for her husband at any moment. Rather, I discovered a reserved, contemplative woman whose sole shortcoming was a noticeable limp. She offered, without my asking, that it was the consequence of a car crash that happened not long after they were married. "It was pretty awful," she said, "and I can't have children, but I'm lucky to be alive, so I don't complain." Her bravery and her husband's choice to remain by her side both struck me as admirable. I thought to myself, maybe he is one of the good guys after all. In our room that night, Nikki was acting a little crazy. She excitedly told me, "He said that he's really happy with my work. He said that he relies heavily on my help. Why don't you come over here and see if you can give me a little help?" I asked as I undressed. Her enthusiasm quickly turned into passion, and before long, we were fully enjoying each other. We had breakfast on the patio on Sunday morning. Naturally, Nikki grabbed a copy of the Washington Post, but as a sign of her devotion to me, she also took a copy of my newspaper. Her turning to its living section and starting to read made me laugh. "Consult Aunt Agatha. Why do you read that stuff?" I inquired. She readily admitted, "I guess I'm like everybody else. I like to read about other people's secrets. Besides, lately Aunt Agatha has been much more interesting, and I really like the advice she gives." There, I came dangerously close to giving away the game, but I forced myself to hold back. Wouldn't she be surprised if she knew? Gleefully, I thought to myself. I truly settled into my new role over the course of the following few weeks. Mandy was proving to be a real pleasure to work with, which was part of what made the job so easy. Our conversations over lunch revealed that her background and mine were similar. She had always wanted to be a reporter, just like me. She had attended the University of Missouri, which is renowned across the country for having a top-notch journalism program. rather than Columbia. Similar to me, she also struggled to secure employment as a reporter after graduating. It was only after management realized Aunt Agatha needed assistance to keep up that she had settled into the role of assistant. Now that we were working together, instead of just responding on a daily basis, the two of us could truly plan out the column. We began selectively selecting the letters to respond to in order to make them adhere to specific themes and make more sense in light of external events. No more letters showing up in the Christmas season discussing summer romances. Mandy was also an adept researcher, finding sources to which Aunt Agatha could recommend her readers in case they required professional assistance. That proved to be quite helpful the day we got an email from a younger reader. "Greetings, Aunt Agatha. At the age of 14, I am at a loss about who else to consult. To get high, my friends and I have been sniffing gasoline. It felt kind of good at first, but after I started throwing up, I frequently get vertigo. I'm afraid and unsure of what to do. My parents threatened to send me away if they ever found me using drugs or doing anything else nefarious. Please lend a hand." How damn stupid can parents get? When Mandy showed me the email, I lost it. Their daughter could have serious medical problems and they've cut off all lines of communication with her. Then I had another unsettling thought. What if she's in very bad physical condition? We are eager to publish our response in the newspaper. There must be a quick way to contact her. Mandy snapped me back to reality. We don't have her phone number or address, and the email account she used was almost certainly fictitious. I answered in frustration. There just has to be some way to find out who she is and where she lives. While I go talk to Amir, you do some research to find out where this girl needs help. Perhaps he knows how to get in touch with her. Our in-house tech expert was Amir. If there was anything about computers, networks, and the internet that he was unaware of, nobody had yet discovered it. He gave me a thoughtful scratch on the head when I found him and told him what was going on. "That one is difficult," he remarked. "Email usually passes through so many servers that it is nearly impossible to determine where it originated. However, if anyone can do it, it's my good friend who works at the National Security Agency." I asked him to lend a hand however he could and turned back to check on Mandy. In the Alexandria region, she had discovered a free clinic that focused on treating teenagers with drug addiction issues. We decided that the best we could do, given the unlikely chance of immediately locating our 14-year-old, was to respond to her email and hope that Alone would check her mailbox to see Aunt Agatha's response. As a backup, we then published the identical response in the newspaper. It was now all up to us to hope she spotted one of them and sought assistance before it was too late. For the next 2 days, nothing happened, and Mandy and I were both feeling pretty down. Then, everything occurred simultaneously. With a sheet of paper in his hand, Amir bounded in. "I've got it," he exclaimed. My buddy came through. As soon as he gave me Alone's personal email address, Mandy entered the room with a printed copy. She yelled, "She got your advice," and we quickly perused the email. "Greetings, Aunt Agatha. I visited the location you suggested, and they were very helpful. I'm no longer dizzy and I've stopped puking. I feel so much better, in fact, that I'm going to try to talk my friends out of using heroin. Thank you." I merely shook my head and glanced at Mandy. This latest development had me unsure of how to react, laughing or crying. However, we managed to reach her. Mandy comforted me. "At least your column is doing a little good." I hoped she was correct. A few weeks later, with his typical frown plastered on his face, the boss entered my office. "I don't know if you're good, kid, but you're definitely the luckiest guy I know." By this point, I'd grown accustomed to these tantrums, so I simply looked up and asked, "Okay, what have I done now?" "Your little column has garnered a lot of attention for reasons I cannot fathom. Your readership is skyrocketing, and it looks like some other papers noticed as well. The simple fact is that your ridiculous column will be syndicated. A dozen other papers across the nation will begin running Ask Aunt Agatha as soon as the paper's attorneys can iron out the kinks." Mandy entered as I was sitting there in shock, raising the crucial query, "What about the money?" The manager merely rolled his eyes. He looked hurt and said, "We got a very clear policy on that. Any writer whose work is syndicated splits the revenues 50-50 with the paper. If you can keep it up, you're about to start making the kind of money normally reserved for the big boys." She wrapped her arms around my neck and let out many squeals. The boss was watching us both yelling and dancing around the room, looking disgusted. Mandy kissed me on the cheek after he left the office and said, "Oh, Casey, congratulations. This is really amazing. I've always known you're unique. We're a team," I informed her. "I couldn't have done this without you." She kissed me again and grinned. "Although it's kind of you to say so, it was you who took a chance and made a change. The column bears your signature, after all. Furthermore, all of the success you will experience is something you deserve." On the way home, I was so happy that I was eager to tell Nikki the good news. However, she was running very late to get home, and when she did, her congressman boss was the only topic of conversation. Congressman Clean's name was being floated as a potential vice presidential candidate, and it appeared that the party was actively seeking a new face for the impending convention. Nikki would not stop talking about what a great vice president he would be and the part she would play in his campaign. Though I was starting to feel like a second violin in Nikki's orchestra, I still tried to listen intently. "Hey, don't forget about me while you're making all your plans," I said, half jokingly. She gestured with a small hand flip. "You're just a copy editor," she remarked. "He is aiming for the prize. He may one day hold the office of President of the United States." After observing my expression, she promptly attempted to retract her previous statement, saying, I'm sure what you do is important to the paper, but after all, it's not likely to wind up in the history books." That hurt so much that I turned to leave before saying something hurtful. She extended her hand to stop me, but her phone rang first. It was a representative from the congressman's office who answered, and she quickly found herself engrossed in the discussion. I stepped outside and strolled through our neighborhood for a while. Naturally, I came to the realization that her words were accurate. Her congressman would rightfully become famous if he were to actually make it to the White House. However, that did not give her the right to speak poorly of her husband in the manner that she had. As I gave it some more thought, I realized that Nikki's regard for me had clearly decreased since she became part of the congressman's inner circle. I could sympathize with her passion for her work, but not with her lack of enthusiasm for her spouse. I chose not to tell her about my syndication because of the way she perceived me. Ultimately, it could take multiple months for the agreement to be finalized, and even then, Nikki wouldn't find it as thrilling as her boss being nominated for vice president. Nikki tried to act like nothing had happened when I got back from my walk, but our relationship was more polite than loving. I had a column to write every day, regardless of how miserable I was about my marriage. However, it was inevitable that my personal life would influence my professional life. A few days later, I discovered an absurdly romantic email in my inbox, and I decided to take a hard line with the writer because I was in a bad mood. I've fallen head over heels in love with this amazing guy at work, and, in addition to being attractive, he is intelligent, humorous, and kind. The only issue is that he is wed. Should I tell him my true feelings for him? Read what I said. Dear secret admirer, don't talk about how you really feel. Regardless of your sincerity of love, you have no right to meddle in this man's marriage. You're going to have to keep your feelings to yourself until he gets single. Go get another job if that hurts too much for you. The romantics in Aunt Agatha's audience were a little offended by this, as they wanted to give the secret admirer a chance, but I was not going to back down at that point because I'd had enough of outsiders interfering in marriages. Things at home just kept getting worse. Because Nikki's work required her to stay at the office later and later, and because of her increased travel, the only way I could find out when she would return home was to look at the copy of her itinerary that she would leave in the home office. She was always flying off to attend fundraisers or go to Party Sage's strategy sessions with the congressman. She was so exhausted when she finally made it home that all she did was sleep and eat. And when I say sleep, I mean it. Doing anything else before bed became extremely uncommon. Not only was my married life getting dimmer, but things at work were also becoming worse. Mandy, who had always been the happiest and most positive person I knew, started acting down. I could see that she was having problems, but no matter how much I tried, she would not let me try to help her. The fact that I could assist complete strangers but not people I knew and cared about struck me as being rather ironic. With Nikki's aloofness and Mandy's melancholy, my days turned into quite demanding experiences. I became a bit of a grump too, and I'm embarrassed to say that I even yelled at Mandy once or twice. Even though I didn't mean anything by it, I suppose my comments must have had a greater effect than I realized because she came into my office one morning and placed her resignation letter on my desk. In a panic, I said, "You can't do this, Mandy. You understand that the things I said the other day weren't intended. Please accept my apologies and remain. You are necessary to me." "Casey, I wasn't bothered by what you said. You weren't attempting to harm me, I knew that. So don't leave," I hurriedly said. "If you can forgive me, then please stay." Her expression wavered for a brief moment before a determined expression took over. "I apologize, Casey, but I have to leave. This method works better." And she turned on her heel and walked out before I could object or come up with some smart counter-argument that would convince her to reconsider. I was crying inside. Why were all the women I knew turning their backs on me? When I called her at home that afternoon to try to persuade her to come back, I discovered that she had moved out and unplugged her phone. She had also canceled her cell. Indeed, upon inquiring, I discovered that neither human resources nor any of her acquaintances were aware of her whereabouts. Oh no. Now that Mandy was gone, I realized even more how much she had contributed to the efficiency of our small business. HR found me a temporary employee to assist with the administrative tasks, but the person they placed was completely useless in terms of offering advice on the column. Furthermore, I wouldn't want to replace the companionship and friendship I shared with Mandy. Oh no. Then something strange happened, and for a while I forgot about Mandy. I became extremely tense when Aunt Agatha received an email one day. "My husband is a nice guy, but he's never going to make much progress, Aunt Agatha. Meanwhile, I've entered into a passionate relationship with a man who has big things ahead of him. I'm not going to turn down this opportunity to trade up. Are there any tips for telling my soon-to-be ex the news?" I initially wrote a sarcastic reply and saved it in my list of things to do the following week. However, there was something in the email's phrasing that triggered a memory, so I took a closer look at it. A few minutes later, I strolled to the opposite end of the room. "Hey, Amir, could your friend at the NSA maybe find another message?" I said to my friend. He asked, "Is it important?" To me, I hate to bother him with trivial stuff. I told him, if I'm right, this could be really important. Amir smiled broadly as he entered my office a couple of days later. He said, "Ask of Amir and it shall be granted," with great grandeur. "My friend has discovered who your mystery correspondent is. It originated from a Bethesda account. I took it from him. This is the account's billing address. Have any meaning for you?" I examined it. Yes, it had some significance for me. That address was my house. It was astounding to me that Nikki could have been so foolish as to send such an offensive email to a column offering advice. However, I was perplexed as to why any of the authors would consult an absolute stranger. Above all, I couldn't believe Nikki or Congressman Clean, for that matter, would be so foolish as to have an affair. Not only was he supposed to be happily married, but his entire public persona was based on morality and family values. Was he and my spouse having sexual relations while out on the campaign trail now? What betrayal on her part, what hypocrisy on his. Every second that went by, my rage increased. Was she planning to abruptly dump me in order to make room for another man? For richer, for poorer, forsaking all others, and all those other promises, whatever happened to them? I knew I was going to experience a deep depression eventually, but for now all I could feel was a desire for retribution. After giving it some thought, I decided what to do. I visited Sam Winston as my first action. Sam was the lead political writer for the newspaper. He was a seasoned professional who had extensive knowledge of Washington. When I first started working here, he had been incredibly helpful in acclimating me to the newsroom. He smiled and said, "What can I do for you, young Casey?" Upon seeing me, "Actually, I may be able to do something for you this time, Sam," I said to him. "What would you say if I could give you a story on Congressman Clean's secret love life with one of his aides? A story like that could be worth a Pulitzer Prize," he stated. He then grinned like a wolf at me. But even if it wasn't, I'd still love the chance to expose the feet of clay of that sanctimonious hypocrite. Then his expression darkened. "So what makes you think the good congressman is doing the dirty with one of his aides?" I gave him an even glance. "Because the aide he's doing is my wife." He gave a blink. But he leaned forward and gave me a pointed look when he realized I was serious. "Let's talk," he stated. "Because they are typically thoughtless and lack creativity, it is not difficult to catch the average adulterer. It is another matter entirely to apprehend an elected official. Office holders are typically more cunning because they are already subject to some level of public scrutiny. However, if a newspaper determines it is worthwhile to use them, it has a wealth of resources at its disposal. And Sam had all those tools at his disposal once he pitched his idea to the managing editor. For obvious reasons, I was not on the investigative team, but with Nikki's daily schedule in hand, I helped Sam get started on compiling a list of the congressman's transgressions. "Follow Nikki," I advised Sam, "and you'll find the congressman there." As expected, Sam entered my office and shut the door after 2 weeks. He replied, "We got him," when I asked him a question. "Congressman Clean has definitely been doing the dirty with your wife." I believe that, deep down, I had entertained a small hope that, by some miracle, everything could turn around and return to normal. But after hearing Sam's remarks, I realized that chance was lost. When hope dies, it dies hard, and I found that bitterness takes its place. "When are you going to lower the hammer?" I replied. "How soon do I need to get my divorce in the works?" "Don't worry, you have time," he said. "Congressman Vickers needs more information so that we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this is a pattern of behavior rather than an isolated incident. Additionally, since the impact will be greater then, we would prefer to wait until it is closer to the nominating convention." Sam grinned, but his gaze hardened. Hypocrites are something I detest. A congressman is going to fall, and fall hard. I shuddered uncontrollably, and at the same moment, I almost felt sorry for Nikki for what was about to happen to him. Nearly, my marriage turned cold, if it had been tense before. When Nikki did show up, we behaved more like roommates than husband and wife. She was rarely home. Remarkably, Nikki remained oblivious to the lack of closeness. It was obvious that her mind was elsewhere, thinking about someone else, I supposed. I was spending more and more time at work, just like Nikki. My work was my only means of escaping my suffering. However, nothing in the office stopped reminding me of Mandy, so even there I was unable to find comfort. I would have done anything to be able to confide in her and ask for advice while I vented my problems to her understanding ears. However, she appeared to have disappeared from the earth. Nobody could figure out where she had gone or how to get in contact with her. I was incredibly sorry for any part my aloofness may have played in her departure. I purposefully avoided Sam Winston's area in the office. Though I was very interested in what was going on, I reasoned that the last thing he needed was some pathetic cuckold asking him stupid questions all the time. Nevertheless, I was eager to learn how Sam's investigation was progressing as the convention approached and discussions about Congressman Vickers' potential vice presidential candidacy intensified. That's why I was relieved when Sam asked me to stop by the conference room in his area one Monday. He motioned for me to close the door behind me as I entered. "It's all going to go down in the next few days," he said to me. We plan to confront him on Thursday morning after he spends the night at the Hay Adams Hotel on Wednesday. Everything will go crazy when the story appears in the newspaper on Friday morning. All I could feel at that point was relief. I could finally stop pretending to my friends and family that everything was fine between Nikki and me, as my sham of a marriage was about to end. I think you should hear this, Sam interrupted my brief moment of reverie. A week ago, we were able to reserve the hotel room next to your wife's room. We recently acquired 2 highly sensitive recording devices, neither of which was very discreet. He picked up his phone and went out of the room, waving at the phone on the table. I prepared myself to listen to what amounted to an amateur audio session featuring my wife as I put on the headphones. It was a little different from what I heard. I couldn't believe she'd pretended to be having fun. That wasn't it. I knew what she sounded like when I got her off. If Nikki had truly peaked, Sam wouldn't have needed fancy listening equipment. I admit that I was initially a little proud to be a man and that the congressman was such a weak lover. However, my feelings worsened when I gave it some thought. Nikki was leaving me because she had found a ticket to her own dream, not because she had found a lover who had made her feel ecstatic. She doesn't love this guy, I figured out. She wants to be the first lady. How could I ever have loved a selfish, imperfect woman like this? My resentment grew stronger as I realized how happy I was to be divorcing soon. Sam returned to the room at that very moment. He inquired, "You okay?" I gave a nod. "When you confront him Thursday, is she going to be with him?" I inquired. "Most likely," he stated, "if they follow their pattern." I told him, "Then I want to be there." He gave me a nervous glance. "Casey, you won't do anything foolish, will you? Not a single revenge scenario or anything similar." I gave a headshake. "She's not worth it, Sam. Don't worry about what I just heard. My only desire is to serve her divorce papers in person and enjoy the experience." He gave a nod. "I recognize. However, you must give me and the photographer time to finish our work." At 5 o'clock in the evening, we were waiting in the Hay Adams wood-paneled lobby. The hotel staff knew all the top reporters in town, so they didn't bother Sam despite their curiosity about us. Sam must have received a message from the bud in his ear because he turned to face me and the photographer and said, "They're coming down." With me at the back, we got up and gathered in front of the elevators. Sam gave me a sharp look over his shoulder. "Remember, no macho stuff." I saluted him like a Boy Scout. "I swear, Sam." The elevator doors opened at that precise moment, startling Nikki and the congressman as they came out due to the flash from the photographer's camera. The congressman blinked multiple times before realizing who was facing him and quickly got better. "Hello, Sam. It's always good to have one of our top journalists working, but don't you think it's a bit early to ask questions?" The reporter disregarded what he said. "Congressman Vickers, would you care to comment on why you and your aide just emerged from her room so early in the morning?" I must commend the man for his agility. "Of course, Sam. I just had a brief meeting with Nicole to go over my daily schedule." "I see. Would you then please clarify why there was a quick meeting in her room last night at 11 p.m. and why it didn't end until a few minutes ago?" Sam continued. The congressman stammered and tried to get his bearings, saying, "Well, that is to say." Sam, though, did not give him time to do so. Holding up a print for the two of them to see, Sam said, "Maybe this picture of you two earlier this month will shed further light on your relationship." I had seen it earlier with Sam. High up in the glass-walled elevator on the outside of a Marriott hotel, the photographer had captured the two of them in an embrace thanks to the use of a powerful telephoto lens. The congressman's sensitive hands were what gave the photo its devastating quality. "How do you think this will affect your position on family values, Congressman?" Sam kept going without stopping. Nikki was standing there in disbelief, her eyes darting all over the place while the congressman and Sam were facing off. Then they turned to stare at me, and she let out a cry, "Casey, why are you in this place?" I took a step forward to confront her, sensing that it was a cue. I told her with equal impartiality, "I'm just here to deliver this divorce petition to you in person," and I gave her the papers. She let out a gasp. "Oh, and by the way," I went on, "in case you're still waiting for an answer to your question to Aunt Agatha, you'll find it in today's edition." After giving her the morning paper with my column open, I turned away. "Wait," she said, catching me off guard. "How could you?" I looked over my shoulder again and saw her focusing on the first item in Dear Aunt Agatha. "My husband is a nice guy, but he's not going to make much progress in life. Meanwhile, I've entered into a passionate relationship with a man who has big things ahead of him. I'm not going to turn down this opportunity to trade up. Are there any tips for telling my soon-to-be ex the news? Kindly, you don't need to worry about going for the gold because your husband already dumped you and knows everything." Aunt Agatha's response perplexed a few of my readers, but since I was writing for myself, I was fairly certain she understood the message. Sam's story caused a media frenzy when it appeared in the stands on Friday morning. It appeared that many people disliked receiving morality lectures, particularly when the one giving the chastisement was revealed to be a sinner. The announcement that the good congressman was no longer a candidate for his party's vice presidential nomination came almost immediately after the first bit of news. Congressman Vickers' wife appeared live on the TV shortly after that story broke. The host consoled the sobbing woman while scolding her husband for his infidelity in front of her millions of fans. The ensuing divorce was messy and widely reported. In the end, the congressman decided to run for re-election in his own district, which was a dumb move. After suffering a crushing defeat, he entirely vanished from the political landscape. Very appropriate, I thought. His name may be remembered by history, but it will be written in infamy. Regarding Nikki, she discovered that she was being pursued by tabloid journalists who were seeking the inside scoop on the other woman. She was forced to move in temporarily with her girlfriend because I had changed the locks on our apartment. She eventually moved back in with her parents after leaving town when the paparazzi became too much for her. After being exposed on national news, Nikki was hardly able to contest the grounds of adultery, so our divorce proceeded swiftly. She made a few attempts to get in touch with me, but she gave up after I made it apparent that all correspondence would need to go through my attorney. We divided what little we had equally, and she didn't receive a dime of those proceeds because the syndication deal wasn't yet complete. When people started asking too many questions after my part in the expose was made public, I kind of became a local celebrity around the paper. However, my boss would always show up and yell at them until they left. Despite his rough demeanor, I discovered that I truly valued this tough elderly man. After divorcing Nikki, I had expected to feel better, but instead I was feeling worse than before. While I didn't miss my ex-wife, I did miss our loving relationship from before all of this began. She had taken all that away from me, and it infuriated me. I enjoyed my brief dating experience, but I couldn't help but think, been there, done that. One day, I was moping away at my desk when I noticed that I was thinking about Mandy. Not only did I feel bad about pushing her away, but I also felt bad about myself. I was thinking about office romances when I suddenly recalled answering a letter from Aunt Agatha on the subject a few months prior. I had to look through a lot of my files to find it, but eventually I found it. I realized after reading it again that I had been rather critical of the girl who had written it, and I wondered how I would respond to the same question now. Then, a crazy idea came to me, and I looked up the day I had received the email. Is it possible that it is? With the note tightly gripped in my hand, I hurried over to Amir's cubicle. I know it's a lot to ask, but could you ask your friend who works for the NSA to look through one more email? Would you please? It would be extremely meaningful to me. With reluctance, he took my email address. He stated firmly, this had better be important. Trust me, I replied, it's a matter of life and death. He was wearing a pained expression when I next saw him. I don't know what you're trying to pull, Casey, but that email came from here, from the newspaper's offices. I knew it, I exclaimed, embracing the stunned techie. Naturally, Mandy was the one all along. She had begun to feel something for me, but she wasn't sure how to go about pursuing it. And I realized that I had told her to butt out of my life in a lot of words. I see why she left the town and quit. What a wonderful counselor I was. I had someone truly exceptional right under my nose, and I was completely unaware of it. I not only ignored her, but I drove her away as well. I needed to locate her. However, I encountered dead ends everywhere I looked. She had not heard from her old friends. She had deleted her page on Facebook. For privacy reasons, HR wouldn't let me look at her job application. But a helpful clerk informed me off the record that she hadn't listed a next of kin that I could try to get in touch with. She had graduated, and the University of Missouri had not heard from her since. My work was starting to suffer from my lonely personal life, my despair over my failed marriage, and my complete inability to find the one person in my life who truly mattered besides my parents. My boss's behavior became so severe that one day he barked at me through the open door. Observe the adorable young child sobbing over spilled milk. You better pull your head out of your asshole and get straight, or your syndication deal will fall through before it ever gets off the ground. Even though his words were harsh, I think they finally made me wake up because I started to really buckle down. My job had become important to me, and I didn't want to screw it up. Damn, I thought to myself, if I blow it with Aunt Agatha on top of Nikki and Mandy, I'll really have hit the trifecta of stupidity. And it was true, despite my lack of knowledge, I had grown to genuinely love Aunt Agatha and all of her readers. I had an idea all of a sudden. It was absurd, irrational, and most likely useless, but desperate times demand desperate measures. Dear Aunt Agatha, I worked with a woman who fulfilled every desire I could ever have, but at the time I was unaware of this because of other circumstances in my life. I let her escape as a result, and I have no idea where she went. How can I make up for the biggest error of my life? Your only hope is that one day she'll understand how you feel and give you another chance. However, you had better make sure she never escapes again if she does. I realize it's a foolish and meaningless gesture, but I had to give it a shot, if nothing else just for my own mental health. A few days later, I received a call to the upstairs office one afternoon. A few attorneys and the managing editor himself were waiting for me. Since I had only met him once, I felt somewhat intimidated. He quickly calmed me down, though, by explaining that the meeting was only to sign a contract for Ask Aunt Agatha's syndication. My little daily column would be syndicated in newspapers across the nation the week after I signed my name on the dotted line. I would begin sharing the weekly proceeds from the deal with the paper after that. To accentuate the sweetness, the big man grinned and told me that during the entire negotiation process, the number of papers signed up to carry Aunt Agatha had increased from 12 to 22, and after 6 months, there might be even more. After signing the papers and shaking hands with everyone in the vicinity, I returned in a daze to my small office. If I could keep my little goose laying golden eggs, I might be able to make some serious money for the first time in my life. While I may not have been a journalistic crusader like Woodward and Bernstein, I was making a living in the field I loved and perhaps even imparting some wise counsel to my readers. Instead of feeling joyous, I found myself wishing I had someone to share my good fortune with. I didn't say anything to the other reporters when I went out for a few beers after work with them. I didn't want to brag about my good fortune, but I knew the word would spread eventually. I went home and had a quiet evening after leaving the bar. I had to ask them not to tell anyone about the good news when I called my parents to share it with them. Though I knew that sooner or later the truth would surface, Aunt Agatha's identity remained a secret. The managing editor had made a comment about holding it secret until they were prepared to start a publicity drive. My parents were happy for me, but my mother was saddened that she was unable to tell her girlfriends how much her son was. My father was pleased that I appeared to be financially independent for the foreseeable future, even though he was still a little perplexed by what I was doing. I was diligently going through a fresh stack of letters the following day when I heard a shy knock on the doorframe. When I first looked up, I didn't see anyone. Then someone hesitated before saying, "Casey." That voice was one I recognized. I exclaimed, "Mandy," and started scurrying around my desk, scattering papers all over the place. I desperately crushed her to me as I picked her up. I told her I thought I had lost you, and as I was kissing her, my ears began to roar. When the roaring continued a minute later, I looked up to find my coworkers cheering and yelling in the hallway outside my office. Mandy gave me an apologetic look. "They sort of followed me when I came looking for you," she continued. At last, the disturbance subsided and individuals started going back to their workstation, leaving my boss alone. He cast a hard look at Mandy. He remarked, "It's about time you got back. This idiot hasn't been worth a damn since you've been gone." I said to Mandy in her ear as he was leaving, "For once in his life, he's absolutely right. Against all odds, my beloved Aunt Agatha has returned to me, and she's even more amazing than I remember. Now what should I do? You moron, ask her to marry you as soon as possible." My comment, my only minor gripe, is he didn't have the confrontation talk with his cheating wife. However, it was a good ending. Do you guys agree? Comment down below, sub and bell, and I will catch you in the next one.